I dated my husband, Murphy Pear, who joined the Naval Reserve, did a year of active, and then we married, lived in California for a year, and his uncle Jack Metters, who owned J&B Auto in Prairie Grove, wanted Murphy to come and work for him. So that's why we moved to Prairie Grove in 1972. I was a little taken aback when we moved to Prairie Grove because I had been here a time or two before we moved to California when he was in the Navy. And when Uncle Jack asked us to move here, Murphy said, "Oh, the population's 5,000 or 6,000. There's a hospital in Prairie Grove. It's a pretty good sized place." And when we pulled into town, the population sign was something in the neighborhood of 1,270 people. So I asked him where the other 4,000 or 5,000 went, and he couldn't answer that question. The Elizabeth Hospital, which had been in operation here for a number of years, had closed by the time we moved here. That was November of 1972, and we never left. J.G. Ward had an auto parts store in Prairie Grove. The IGA store was still operative down on Main Street or Buchanan Street. The Southern Mercantile was open with Florence. And we learned early on that if you needed something and Flo didn't have it, then you didn't really need it. It was a great place to go and shop. Very interesting because there were ladies that would quilt upstairs at the Southern Mercantile when we first moved here. And that continued for a number of years. I don't know how long before that quit, but there was a group that would quilt upstairs at the Southern. That was, I don't really remember the ladies that were involved because I was not involved much in quilting at the time, but I did find it intriguing that hand quilting was still an art that was being carried on a regular basis. The Crescent department store was there. Elton Skelton was one of the very first people that we met when we moved to Prairie Grove, and he was very influential for us. He really welcomed us to Prairie Grove and did everything that he could to make us feel good about being here. The Farmers Merchants Bank was in operation, and Murphy's Uncle Jack Metters had already talked to Wilford Thompson about getting me a job at the bank. Before I even got to Prairie Grove, I pretty much had an interview lined up with Wilford. In my interview, he made me type part of a legal description to see if I could type, and I'd never even seen a legal description. I was 23 years old, and I'd worked in an electric motor company sales office for the most part before I got here. So a legal description with part of the northeast quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 32 West in Township whatever, that was just totally Greek. And it was the only one I ever typed in the 6 years that I worked at the Farmers Merchants Bank. Of course, Uncle Jack had J&B Auto. There was, I can't remember who all was in business at that time. The IGA store, there were two grocery stores down on Buchanan Street. The IGA and then Guy Sparks and Kenny Bartholomew had the other one. When I first started at the bank, I was a bookkeeper, and it was a double entry posting system with enormous machines with full keyboards with all these numbers, and all of the accounts were posted by signature because in 1972 there were no account numbers. There was no Micker encoding on the, well, there was Micker encoding, but only of amounts. So I was a bookkeeper, and I did that for probably 9 months, and then I was trained to run a proof machine. And I did that for the rest of the time that I worked at the bank. I worked there for a little over 6 years, and then I got an opportunity to go to work for a CPA. And that CPA bought out the practice of a CPA who was also serving as the city recorder treasurer and doing the books for the city. So in conjunction with getting the job for the CPA, that was in 1979, I got appointed to be city recorder treasurer because the CPA that I was working for did not live in the city of Prairie Grove, so he could not have that title. And the city split the amount that they had been paying the previous recorder treasurer between me and my boss, Dan Pryor. And I got $50 a month and Dan got $300. And then I've stayed recorder treasurer, which later changed to clerk treasurer, for almost 34 years. The arrangement continued the entire time that I worked for Dan. I worked full-time for him, and part of my job was doing the books for the city. So I got a nominal salary, which got raised from $50 to $60 at one time after about 8 years. I don't remember what year that was, and then at some point it went to 75 or 80. It was kind of a pain to get a raise because it required enacting an ordinance which the council would have to approve. So then shortly before I retired, they split the positions of clerk and treasurer and changed the salaries, and the last few months that I worked, I got paid $150 a month because they had split to pay the clerk one amount and the treasurer another amount, and it totaled $150, and I was doing both jobs, so I got that big raise at the end after almost 34 years. The clerk before me, or recorder treasurer before me, was Carl Burris. He was a CPA. He was a volunteer fireman here in Prairie Grove, and he and his wife Sarah had a couple little children. Carl got an opportunity to join a CPA firm in Texas, and he sold his practice to Dan Pryor. And when Carl sold the practice to Dan, he asked Dan if he knew anybody that could run the office for him here in Prairie Grove, and Carl gave him my name. And I set up an interview, and I decided to jump in with both feet and left the bank where I could have had stability, but I didn't see really room for advancement. I worked with great people at the Farmers Merchants Bank. They were wonderful people. You know, I still see a lot of them, love them. They were great, but for a woman in banking in the 1970s, there just didn't seem to be much future for advancement. I had taken some accounting classes, and I was still running a proof machine after 6 years, and I got to cross-foot an expense journal occasionally, but that seemed like very little awareness of the fact that I had more skills than just running a machine. As recorder treasurer, part of my job was taking the minutes at the council meeting, so I attended virtually every council meeting for almost 34 years, with the exception of missing an occasional one when I was either sick or had a baby at one point, and really attended a council meeting when she was 3 weeks old. So yeah, I was in on an awful lot of meetings and then wrote up the minutes. And I think maybe I tended to be a little too wordy in the minutes, but I tried to keep a good, honest account of everything that was said and by whom it was said at the meetings. I think it was important for the history of Prairie Grove for it to get recorded accurately. Well, when I first started, there were so few employees that payroll was certainly a very simple thing to do. We had a chief of police and about 3 officers, I think, and 2 sanitation department people and 2 in the street department and a couple in the court, or maybe just 1 court clerk. So payroll really didn't amount to much of a chore. And the growth of the city is one of the things that has impressed me the most. I was also pleased to see how willing the people of Prairie Grove were to take on additional sales tax responsibilities in order to provide things for the city that the citizens seemed to want. From very early on, anytime there was a poll taken, questionnaire sent out, what would you like to see in Prairie Grove? One of the big things was always, we want a swimming pool. We want a swimming pool. So there came a time that a sales tax was passed so that we could get that swimming pool. Pool's been open going on 20 years now, and it's a tremendous asset for the city of Prairie Grove. I also remember the time that the council had to increase water rates by 36 or 37%, and that brought about the largest attendance at a city council meeting that I believe we'd ever had, because nobody wanted to see their water rates go up by that amount. And we didn't want it to happen either. The council, I say we, I'm not a part of the council, or had no vote, but we didn't want to do that. It was painful, but it was necessary because we had not put enough money back into the depreciation funds and enough money to pay bond debt service. And it was just a necessary evil that we take this huge hit on water rates. And they implemented a policy after that of having a 2 or 3% increase every other year or so that we were able to keep up better with the sinking funds and depreciation funds and have the money on reserve so that we could take on a lot of the maintenance and repair projects that we didn't have to pass bond issues to do some big things. We did some bigger things with money that was on hand rather than running short and then having to borrow money and go into debt more. The main reason that they did it was that they had gone on for a number of years without having a rate increase. I mean, when we first moved to Prairie Grove in 1972, we were living on Jenkins Road, and we actually were not on city sewer at that time. We paid a city water bill, but had a septic system in the house that we rented, and we were only there for about 6 months, but our water bill was $6. And it stayed at a very low rate for a long time. Remember a time that there was a giant water leak that it took a long time to find it, and the water department was losing a lot of water, and they went around town with sound detecting equipment to try to locate the source of this water leak. And when they finally found it and dug up the street, it was like all water, just water underneath the pavement. You didn't see it, it wasn't surfacing. It wasn't bubbling to the top where it was a visible water leak. It took some special equipment to find it. I guess when I came on, J.G. Ward was the mayor. And J.G. and I got along just, we got along just fine. He was, he's actually a cousin of somebody that I knew from high school in Fort Smith. So, but he was easy enough to get along with, for me anyway. I had a lot to learn at the beginning. Boyce Davis was the city attorney, and he was an immense help to me. And he's not a mayor, but that I derailed. So after J.G., Minor Wallace was mayor briefly. I really didn't have any trouble with any of the mayors. Andrew Bain was an excellent mayor, followed in his father's footsteps, serving as mayor of Prairie Grove. Calvin Bain, his father, had been the mayor in the 60s, 50s, 60s probably. If there was anyone that I kind of butted heads with, I would have to admit that it was Eileen Manning. And she was a very smart woman. And but I think we were probably two strong personalities that didn't quite see eye to eye on several measures, and she wanted me to be quiet and not have any input. And I felt that as an elected official for the city of Prairie Grove, that there were some times that perhaps I should have some input into the council proceedings. And she preferred that I just stay quiet and take notes at the meetings. And I'm being very honest here, and you know, I think Eileen was really a very good person. She was so active in her church and in the women's club. She, I think, kept the women's club in Prairie Grove going for many, many years. But perhaps we were too much alike, and we tended to butt heads. Sonny Hudson, whom I fondly refer to as Sonny Honey, he's been a really good active mayor. He's been, I think, very good for the city of Prairie Grove and represents the city well. He's served in leadership positions with the Arkansas Municipal League and really works hard at being a mayor, and I think that's good. Larry is, I think, the heart and soul of the city administration. He knows virtually everything there is to know about the history of Prairie Grove. He could tell you where every water and sewer line is in the city. I know that he makes people angry, but you're not going to make everybody happy. That it doesn't work, and if it's working, if you're making everybody happy, you're doing something wrong, I think, because he's very forward thinking and has encouraged the council, when we did the major new waste treatment plant. That was a major project that the city undertook, and it almost didn't happen because a couple of the aldermen didn't want it to happen, but we'd already committed to a bond issue to make it happen. Had that not happened, the growth that we're seeing, particularly right now, couldn't be happening, because without that additional enlarged sewage treatment plant, we could not have all the new construction that we have in Prairie Grove right now. The Sundowner subdivision has gone crazy. When it was first platted between Sundowner and all the different newer subdivisions that were platted in the late 90s, early 2000s, all of those, they couldn't happen. They couldn't be filled up, and Sundowner is well on its way to being filled up. If you look at it now, it's much more occupied than it was when it first started. It got a very slow start, but some of the aldermen didn't think that current people should have to pay an increased water and sewer rate to pay for new construction for people that didn't already live here, that we shouldn't be paying. But I think it was important that we did pay for the growth, because all of that new growth will contribute a lot to the tax base of the city. There will be money that comes into the city from, not just from the water and sewer rates that are paid by those new homes, but the taxes that they pay to the school and to the county. So Larry pushed for that. Larry Ulrich is, he knows what's going on, and he sees the future very well, I think, to try to keep us moving in a positive direction. And also he works hard at keeping staff lean. I don't think that we are oversupplied with employees so that people are standing around doing nothing. He's an excellent manager, and in my opinion, he's just an excellent manager, and he has many things to manage. Besides, he has water and sewer and sanitation and the parks and recreation, the swimming pool, basically everything except the police and courts. One of the things that the citizens did when they passed a sales tax to build a swimming pool was to also pass a quarter-cent sales tax that is ongoing for parks and library operations. And that helps a whole lot to maintain our pool, mock park, the ball fields that have been built, so that there are a lot of kids from Prairie Grove and from outlying areas, children that are in the Prairie Grove School District, that play baseball and softball here all the time. And the prices are kept relatively low. The admission prices at the pool are not onerous. That's I think it's a forward-looking city. And the library has expanded. Prairie Grove has the first freestanding children's library in the state of Arkansas. And part of that is we're able to do that because of this quarter-cent sales tax that the people adopted, knowing this quarter-cent never goes away. It's going to keep the pool and the library operating for a long time. Having the Battlefield Park here is a tremendous asset, and I hope that the Clothesline Fair continues for many years.